Hello, I'm Will, the Paint Beast, and in this video we're going to take a look at underpainting miniatures. Hey mini painters, today let's dive into a rewarding and effective technique known as underpainting. Now underpainting is the first half of what we kind of know nowadays as Slapchop. It's the process of taking a light colour and dry brushing it over a dark colour so that when we apply transparent paint, a kind of highlight and shadow is automatically applied to the miniature. Mostly this method is used for speed painting. Now, while speed painting definitely has its place, what happens if we take a step back and try to refine the process to get even better results? In this video, I'll show you some extra steps you can take to elevate the quality of your Slapchop. Whether you're a beginner or a seasoned painter, there'll definitely be something here for you. We'll cover techniques developed by the miniature painting community as a whole, like how to avoid chalky dry brushing, the difference between dry brushing and overbrushing, and how to build volumetric highlighting using different colours. Don't worry, these topics may sound complex, but they're much more simple than they seem. And by incorporating them into our skill set, we will enhance our miniature painting while still retaining the same amount of fun and achievement. Right, let's head over to the desk and look at what equipment we're using, why we're using it, and get to painting. So the first thing you'll notice is probably the wooden board. Now I prefer to use a wooden board over paper towel to dry brush, simply because that wooden boards, or wood in general, is absorbent but not as absorbent as the paper towel, so it won't take all of the moisture out of the paint, and that's really important because the reason you get chalky effects when dry brushing is because you've taken all of the moisture out of the paint. We actually need moisture in there, so think about dry brushing as a very sort of dry overbrush. And if you don't know the difference between overbrushing and dry brushing, we're going to cover that in here. So what else have we got? We've got the wooden board, which is going to come in useful. We've got our selection of makeup brushes of different sizes. Now these are only like £3 from Amazon, just that came in a set. If you have proper professional dry brushes, you can use those as well, but I do quite like the makeup brushes that you can get just sort of from any shop. We do have some paper towel. Now that's only just in case we need to clean our brushes, or if a bit too much moisture gets on the dry brush. We have a pot of clean water, and you'll see why in a second. That's not just for cleaning your brushes in this video, it's for something else as well, which we'll get onto. And then we've got our paints. So I've sprayed the miniature in black, which you'll see in a second, but we're going to use Eshin Grey, Storm Vermin Fur, Administratum Grey, Corax White, and some White Scar. Now these aren't exclusively what you have to use. The main premise here is that you go from a dark grey to a white, and you pass through sort of a medium grey or a warm tone grey, a light grey, a white, and Corax White is actually a very light grey, and then you get to a bright white at the end, and that's the whole premise of it. So instead of going from black to white straight away, which is sort of the classic way to Slapchop or underpaint a miniature, we're going to build up a series of tones and volumes of light using a range of paints. So I've got a Seraphon Lizardman Croc Score here. I really like these minis. They've got lots of interesting textures on, perfect for demonstrating how dry brushing works. So what's the first thing we do? Well, we want to start building up some light. We're going to use the darker grey, Eshin Grey, here to build in the first sort of layer, but it's not going to be a dry brush, it's going to be an overbrush. So what is overbrushing in terms of overbrushing, dry brushing, etc.? Well, overbrushing is a very sort of wet dry brush, as it were. It's kind of that stage between layering and dry brushing, and essentially what it is it's a thick layer of dry brushing. So we're going to take our sort of larger makeup brush here, and this is very important. This is one of the basic principles of dry brushing. You have to make the brush a little bit moist. You can get different things for this. You can get little pots, little moisture pots, but what I prefer is to dip my finger into the jar of water, get a drop on there, put it on the board, and then just do that. And that's now put enough moisture in this brush for me to be able to use the paint without the paint drying out too much. So we're going to give this a good shake, and we're going to put some on the brush here. That's one of your basics of dry brushing, I'd say, is just make sure there's a little bit of moisture in the brush. Now, the wood is not going to absorb all of the moisture like a paper towel would. Again, another sort of basic principle. We're going to just pop some on there, and we're just going to muddle that into the brush, and we're going to go until there's only a little bit coming out of here. Now this paint is quite wet still. It's not a true dry brush, this is an overbrush. And what we're doing is we're just catching all of the top surfaces, and we don't have to be neat about this, because actually what we're trying to do is just paint the entire miniature with this dark grey, except for the true recesses. So like here, next to the legs, here under the chin, and just anywhere you can see a gap in the scales. Basically everything else we want to be covered in paint. So I'm just going to take that off autofocus. So what we're going to do is we're going to carry on doing that until the entire miniature is covered in Eshin grey, but we've still got some of the black showing through. Now, what you notice is I didn't put water on the palette then. You don't have to do that too often. If you do it too often, the brush does get too wet. So let's get slightly closer to the camera. So we're just going to do this. As you can see, it's sort of coating it, except for the very, very deepest recesses. So that's just popped off there. Okay, just a process of carrying on doing that, and this is why we use this large dry brush, right? We're not looking for precision at this particular instance. We just want to get this done and on here very quick. And you can see even with this overbrush, you're getting a little bit of definition even on the bits that you're not worrying about too much, which is great. That's why, you know, there's a trend towards people using Slapchop nowadays. Whoops. Because it's easier to do, right? It's not cheating, but it is easier. So we're going to carry on doing this until the miniature is completely covered in this Eshin grey. Oops. Until it's my first time filming a YouTube video, because I keep messing up, going off the camera, off-piste, etc. Right. But you'll notice this isn't like a one dip in the paint pot done. This is more purposeful slap chopping, underpainting, etc. We want to build these tones up because we want this to make it look good, right? We're sacrificing a slight amount of speed for a bit more of a professional look. Again, if you were going straight from black to white, it would take far less time, but you wouldn't get all the mid-tones, and you wouldn't get sort of the more stark highlights, and you wouldn't get the proper shadows. And all we're doing here is we're just going to trick the eye into thinking that we've not done all the hard work, because it's, you know, it's hard to learn, but we're going to trick the eye into making it look like we've done a lot of consecutive highlight layers, etc. Okay, so I'm happy with that. That is now looking much more grey than it does black, but you've still got sort of the shadows in here. But you can see that a lot of the paint has still gone into some of the deeper recesses that we're not going to catch later on in this process, and that's what overbrushing is, right? We're just taking the wet paint and we're just brushing it over, and it's catching all the raised surfaces, but also sort of giving it a nice blend in there. And the reason it's different from dry brushing is because dry brushing, pretty much no moisture in the brush apart from, you know, the little bit that we want, and it really catches every edge and every surface, and it is quite dry. Right, so we've got a little bit more water in the brush now, so we'll probably use some of that up. We're just going to muddle the brush a bit more on the wooden board, just to get most of the pigment from the last layer out. Although having some in there doesn't really matter because you get a nice blend. This paint's quite thick, yours is probably not as thick as this, so I'm going to use a tiny bit. Just colour that there. And we're going to, again, just muddle it on the wooden board until most of it's come off the brush. Now, this has significantly less paint on it than the last layer, and that's what makes it a dry brush. Overbrushing has quite a lot of paint on the brush. Dry brushing has very little paint on the brush. And I'm now not pushing right into the miniature. Before, I was kind of smushing the paint into the recesses in places where I knew I wanted the dark paint. This time, I'm just lightly dry brushing from top to bottom. I'm not going up and down, just going from top to bottom. And this is just going to catch the top edges, and this is the volumetric highlighting I was on about, or the building volumes of light. We are simulating the sun being in the sky, because the sky is often, probably, except from night, obviously, the sky is the brightest point of light, even if it's a cloudy day. So most light is going to come from directly above. It'll give a bit of surrounding, but mostly from directly above. So we're going to carry on doing this until most of this miniature will then have sort of a brighter highlight of this next colour. And as you can see, I didn't keep going back so much then to put more paint on my brush. I'm going to put a little bit more on now, but I think that's going to be it for this particular colour. So, what have we learned so far? Use a bit of wood to make sure that you don't draw all of the moisture out of the dry brush. That's very important, that's one of the basics. If you do need to clean your brush, you can use a bit of paper towel to wick all of the moisture out. Yeah, and we're just going to carry on doing this until we feel like we've got enough. And you can make this as bright or as dark as you like. There's no need to follow exactly what I'm doing. As you can see, if you saw there, this is maybe another quick thing that you might not think about. I'm supporting this bit of the miniature because it's probably quite weak there. So I'm supporting it with my finger so it doesn't snap. Sorry, this video is all over the place. I'm not actually really talking about what I said I would, but I promise I'll get better. So, there you go. We're not going to do that too much because if you carry on doing this, you might start to rub some of the paint off. You can kind of see here where it's starting to rub the top layer off a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to set that aside for a sec, and then we're going to clean this brush because we're not going to use it anymore. It's important to clean it straight away because the next time you come to use some dry brushing, your brushes are in good condition. So we're just gonna rinse that out, and then I'll use this and I'll show you how we get most of the pigment out of the brush. So we're gonna just muddle that in there a few times, really scrape it on the edge so we just make sure that pigment is coming out. There we go. We're going to take our paper towel, I'm just going to press it firmly on there, just get all of that water out. There's still pigment in the brush, so we're going to go back, do this. And while we're doing this guy here, the paint is curing more. So it's not really drying, right, because we've put the paint on dry. Right, so I'm not going to use this again today, so I can just put that aside. and that'll dry on its own. And then maybe later on, tomorrow or later on today, I'll put some brush soap in it. And we're going to move on now to our biggest of the smaller brushes, if that makes sense. And we're going to use Administratum Grey. So this is where our true first choice in where we put our volumetric highlights comes in. So we're obviously thinking about the top areas here, tops of the legs, tops of the chest, the face, all the tops of the scales, and the top of the weapon. Now this brush, because it's smaller, it will run out of moisture quicker than the big brush. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep doing this. We're going to put a drop with our fingertip on here, model that into there. That's now slightly moist. Shake up our paint. Whoa, I didn't mean to throw that in there. That was a slip of the hand, but that's okay. Because there's too much paint in there, because of that accident, I'm going to take it off with the paper towel. Because I don't want that much paint on there. And we're going to repeat the process again with the water. So we're going to take some water out of the jar, pop it on the board, and then just put some in the bristles, just making sure it's not too wet. If you can feel that it's wet, it's too wet. I'll pop a little bit of paint on the brush, pop it on the wood, and then model it in. I'm going to use a bit of the wood that we can see, and this acts just like a texture palette. You may have seen people building their own texture palettes online. You don't need to do that, you can just get a bit of wood. A bit more on there. Okay, cool. Right, so now we'll start on this leg, shall we? And because this is similar, or at least not too far away from the last colour we used, we kind of get this nice gradient between the two colours. As long as we focus in the areas that sort of are pointing more towards the light, we get these nice natural gradients. And we're not going to push upwards like I said. We're only going to go down because we're mimicking the light catching the top surfaces. And if you start to think that it's getting too chalky, which you may see here, so it looks a little bit too chalky here for me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the water. I'm going to put a bit more water in the brush. So I'm going to put some more on here, get some more in the brush, and you'll see the paint will start to come out a bit more smooth. I'm going to put more paint on the brush and just repeat the process that we've just done. Maybe just check a little bit on our thumb as well. And then really lightly, just from top to bottom, just do this. Just catching the top edges, and this is us, again, building up the volumetric highlighting. So we're going to focus really on the face as well, because that's one of our focal points when we look at miniature. I think the brush is slightly too wet because the paint is just painting onto this guy's nose, which is okay in this part because we're kind of highlighting up, so it's a big block of colour, but we don't want that to happen everywhere. So we're going to take the paper towel again. I'm just going to make sure all of that moisture is out of the brush. We're going to reset the brush, put a bit of water on the palette, maybe rub it in with our finger a bit so most of it goes away, put it back in the brush. More paint on the brush, that's a bit too much, so we'll just really scumble it in there. Go back to the miniature. And very lightly just focus our brushing from top to bottom on the highest edges. Now you don't have to stick to this black to white sort of scheme. You can spray your miniatures in like a grey, and then go from grey to bright white. Or you may have seen in other videos of mine, you can go from like a purple to a yellow, or something like that, and that, you know, that just adds some extra depth to a miniature, I feel. It's an interesting, fun way to paint as well. So I want this chest area maybe to be a bit lighter, because the croc squad that you see on the box, they have sort of like a fade of light colour to the dark colour. So we're gonna just focus a bit more on there. Whoops, I was come off the base. Oh. Shouldn't really touch the miniatures, but for the demonstration purposes, I think this is fine. We'll carry on just doing that until we're happy with the volumes of light. It's okay to leave areas almost completely black as well, because it'll look like a natural shadow. Brush. And in sort of tough, in tough areas, you can kind of get the brush in there and just twirl it around. Just make sure you're getting the highlights on those upper areas. So I'm not yet used to concentrating on both the screen and the miniature, but I will get better, that's a promise. Okay, so I'm almost done with this colour. I'm going to go on to the whites next. I'm going to stick with this brush because it's covering a nice sort of area of this miniature. But then when we get to sort of the brightest highlight, we'll switch over to a smaller brush. So that's probably enough of that. Will he stand up? Yes. Right. Again, rinse and repeat. It's the same thing. Shake it up. Put a bit of water on the board. Just dab your brush in that a little bit. Make sure it's not too wet. Grab some of your white paint. Scumble that around. Put quite a lot on this one. Didn't mean to, but we're just gonna keep going until there's no, or it looks like there's no paint left on the brush. Whoops. Roll that around a bit more. There you go, that'll do. So for this colour, we're going to focus on top of the arms, top of the weapon, top of the scales, the face, the top of the chest, the top of the legs, the top of the feet, and the top of the tail. So we'll start at the legs again like we have been. It's quite good to start maybe lower down on the miniature sometimes, just to sort of get a feel of how much paint is in the brush, because nobody is looking here first, they're looking here first. So if you mess up a little bit down here, it doesn't matter too much. As you can see, I'm not really moving away from this sort of section here, or this section here. I'm not going to paint too far down the leg. It's just going to be bright highlights just here. It's from top to bottom, so we catch the top but not the bottom. And again, we'll do the same for the next leg. sort of teasing it on there just to make sure we've got the right consistency of paint on the brush, because there's no, you know, no real formula like this amount of water makes this amount of paint come out on your brush. It's all just doing it by feel, because your paints will be different to mine depending on, you know, the humidity in where you live or how long you've had the paint. But we're just going to build these volumes up just on the top parts of the miniature and focus on the details like the face and the weapon and the hands. In this case, on this guy, the scales as well, because they're obviously a big part of this cold-blooded army. That's something to think about as well when you paint. It's like, what features do people associate with this faction? And what do I really have to put effort in to make people go, okay, that looks like a lizard man, or that looks like a space marine, or something like that. And each one of these layers will get quicker and quicker. So the first layer, obviously you have to go around the entire miniature first. In this layer we only have to do the absolute tops and the bits that we want to look like they're hitting, the sun is hitting them. So just the edges of the scales, the top here, top of the weapon. And this will give you, if you put the right colour on this, like almost a non-metallic look on these bits, because that's how, you know, in theory, how there's a mould line there. Ugh. Because in theory, this is how the light catches the metal. Right, so I've gone pretty much all around the sort of top edges of the bits I want the light to catch. But we're just going to spend an extra 30 seconds just focusing on the details around the face, and we're just going to make sure that people are going to notice this. Okay, cool. And you can even see right now that the face and the upper body is much brighter than the lower parts. I'm just going to maybe put a little bit more here just so we can see the details on the chest. A bit more on the tops of the arms. Cool. Right. Now for the last layer. We are going to use some white scar. We're going to get our smallest dry brush for the brightest white, and we're only going to focus on very small areas. So just like before, we need to put some moisture on the brush, so we're going to dab our finger in the water, just put a little bit of moisture in the brush, make that a little bit damp. Cool. I'm going to shake our paint up, and we are going to, a little bit, this is all lumpy, it's a horrible paint, but it's really nice bright white, so we're going to tolerate it for now. Just make sure there's enough in the brush. And if there's too much in the brush there, so I'm just going to wipe most of it away on the wood, and we're not going to come back to that. Just leave it there, muddle this in here. And we're not going to be painting with this for too long because white goes very chalky very quickly. So we're just going to, well, you'll see how long it takes. So just focus on the face. And already I can see there's dust coming off of the brush, so we're going to stop that. Put a bit more moisture on the palette. Put that into the brush. Go back to this white. Put a bit on the brush. Make sure that there's not too much or too little. You should only just be able to see it on the wood. Done the face, now we're going to focus a bit on the top of the weapon, because that's another sort of key feature of this miniature. So we're picking out sort of the key features at this point. So I'm going to go back, do exactly the same thing. Because this brush is smaller, it doesn't hold so much moisture and it will run out quite quickly. So Just going to keep repeating the same steps. But this time we're going to go for the hands. So we're going to put it on the tops of the knuckles there, and just the top, very top bits of the arms. Cool. And then we're just going to do the same sort of thing on any of the other bits of the miniature that we want to stand out. Tops of the legs. Really build that gradient up from here to here. Tops of the chest. There you go. And this isn't perfect by any means, but it does give a great sort of representation of where to put the light. It's okay to go back and do bits that you think you might have missed as well. Just going to grab those scales. Okay, cool. So that's, well, I hope I've made it simple, but I was going to say it's as simple as that, but that's kind of how to build a bit of volume using dry brushing, a little bit about the basics of dry brushing, and just making sure that your brushes act the way you want to and the paints act the way they do, and hopefully a little bit about how overbrushing is different to dry brushing. There you go. And in my next video we'll look at how to use contrast paints to sort of colour this guy in. This is now like a paint by numbers, right? So I can just put blue, like a light blue here, light blue contrast, dark blue here, maybe like a metallic sort of contrast paint or speed paint on the metal bits, and we're good to go. Thanks for joining me in this look at underpainting. I hope you found these techniques helpful in enhancing your miniature painting skills. Remember, practice makes perfect, so continue to work on your creations and have fun at the same time. This is by no means the definitive guide for underpainting, and there'll be loads more tutorials and videos out there, so I encourage you to go and have a look and draw on the wealth of experience of other painters. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Small actions like those really help a new channel like mine to grow. The next video in this series has already been uploaded to my Patreon, which is linked in the description below. So if you'd like to give me a bit of extra support, head over there and become a member, just like these fine people. Any and all support is very much appreciated, and you'll get some extra treats as well. Until next time, remember to unleash the paint beast within you and get painting that plastic. Happy painting. Don't worry, these topics may sound complex, but they are much more simple than they seem. By incorporating them into our skill set, we'll enhance our miniatures, our miniature painting. There you go, let's change that. Miniature painting, while keeping the same sense of fun. That's the most important bit, is the fun. The fun is the most important bit. It doesn't matter what anyone else tells you, right? The fun is the point. Top tip.